As a GM, I'm often annoyed at my players' lack of attachment. Like a first person shooter, they only care about what lies in their narrow forward vision and feel if it cannot be stabbed or shot at, it should be disregarded. And unless the undeniable noise of a demon mecha zombie is skulking behind them, they have no desire to turn around. Like so many open sandbox games, they do what they like, when they like, how they like, content and comfortable. At no point will their normal lives be affected by what happens. Certain emotional reactions are popular in games: anger, laughter, the satisfaction of drilling a Bowie knife in said demon mecha zombie. But trying to evoke an emotional reaction like sadness or, heaven forbid, guilt is like trying to convince Hannibal Lecter to cut down on his intake of human spleens. Several years ago, my Amethyst campaign ground to a close after 11 years, and 3 sessions before the curtain, I revealed to one player, that he had been responsible for everything that had occurred until then, but simply couldn't recall the acts in which he committed. And these weren't like everyone was late for work because he forgot to set the alarm, or clicking on a link for the latest Kardashian side boob shot allowed the network to be infected by the latest monkey poop fleeing virus, but a rather serious case of planetary genocide. Once I'd managed to make my case that the player couldn't absolve himself from being a clone, my player turned around and took the amnesia defense. That his lack of remembering the event equated his innocence, that since he couldn't remember either committing the crime or remembering his motivations for committing it, actually committing the crime was incidental. He wasn't like that person, and as such was not responsible. The player immediately followed up, backed by no objection by the fellow PCs the player had in fact screwed over, by claiming that there had been a precedent in our modern criminal justice system. Without pausing the game to immediately call this player on his bullshit, I let the moment pass, reaffirming publicly my joy that this was my last Amethyst game. It wasn't, by the way. Now, just a heed warning to those out there which enjoy being a DM or GM: don't populate your group entirely with tabletop wargame aficionados. Anywho, the next day, a 5-minute search on Google and Wikipedia revealed that unless your amnesia was a side effect of the same condition that committed the crime, you can't use amnesia as your defense, even if you're able to prove the memory loss. This is backed up by numerous cases. Proof that you committed a crime has no bearing if you can remember it. If you can pile drive an elderly lady into the Starbucks because you had a few too many Long Island iced teas but can't remember the evening, doesn't change the fact you pile drove an elderly lady into the Starbucks. About the only time this has ever worked was that famous sleepwalking case and the guy that stabbed his buddy to death because he hadn't enjoyed a Snickers bar the hour before. But I digress. The bankrupt ethics of my players notwithstanding, I came to realize that most players, mine most of all, would never accept personal responsibility for anything their characters ever did, even if they had a hand in the creation of their characters and their personality. This is why, if I ever plan on finishing my novel on Amethyst, these characters would be replaced with my own creations, because who wants to read about a bunch of shallow glory hounds who only care about themselves and spend the whole of their time in the obviously lucrative profession of gut-punching puppies until they spit out gold? I've already stated that the argument of amnesia is no way to absolve one's guilt, but apparently it also absolves someone of responsibility. Even when I made the argument that even if the player may not be guilty, he was still responsible, the player instead got upset. Why? Because of his claim that it wasn't his job to fix the very problem that an early version of himself had committed. As a GM, approaching 35 years experience, I've seldom been able to evoke a negative emotional reaction other than anger. Players have rarely been affected by the loss of an NPC, unless that NPC granted some insight bonus for being in combat, and players rarely weigh the consequences of seemingly foolish acts. Many years previously to this event, in the same Amethyst game, the same group of players imprudently tried to disrupt a bunch of terrorists with hostages firmly clasped in hand and firearms brushing their temples. The temples of the hostages, not the terrorists. That would be silly. The plan was incredibly irrational and short-sighted, and when it failed, several terrorists escaped, and all but one of the hostages was killed. Instead of being angry at themselves or sad at the loss of the hostages, the players initially became hostile to me for not allowing them the capacity of solving every crisis with bullets, and then later at the families of the victims because the players were being blamed for the loss of their loved ones. One player absolved himself with this psychic assumption that the hostages would have been killed regardless, while another one simply countered that the family should have done more to help. Heroes, I say. And after a quarter of a century of telling stories, I realized that rarely do players evoke anything close to realistic expected human emotions. But this could be a consequence of that same period of electronic gaming, where if you can't solve a problem by eviscerating a target with a chainsaw sword, you give up. I should have known better, since the iconic symbol of heroism paraded by so many people is a 7-foot-tall space marine with no name and a personality duller than Snake Plissken. Thankfully, certain electronic games force guilt and remorse, but then go about it so poorly that we don't question why the character we play suddenly leaps back into sawing Nazis in half with an improvised lawnmower. Nowadays, you can include morality or accountability without also including some reward system outside of doing something because it's the right thing to do. Mass Effect was the only one that ever included a mechanical reward system to its morality outside of simply offering you more opportunities to select that same morality later in the game. That worked brilliantly until the end, where the game decided to not only ignore your morality, but also render the choices your morality made during the course of the game irrelevant. Now, I'll conclude with my own experiences in jarring, uneven accountability. I played numerous characters in Star Wars The Old Republic. Yes, this is going back a ways. One was a Sith warrior. I was leaning healthily on the light side, offering leniency and mercy among those who asked for it. The game did an admirable job trying to explain why I'd killed Jedis with spiteful vigor in my spare time, then get praised by my non-player companions about my compassion. It actually didn't make sense why I'd be a champion of light while decapitating passing Jawas whose only crime was asking for a hand in gathering droid parts. And this is not just in the disparity between conversations and grinding battles. Even in cutscenes, my character was often not given the choice in being a complete asshole. 3 choices, all variations of asshole, despite having spared enemy soldiers not 5 minutes earlier. What does it say about the psychological state of a man that chums through 50 Republic soldiers only to offer the hand of peace to the ultimate target of the mission? But then again, if you're looking for ethics in a sandbox filled with George Lucas's beard droppings, you'd best absolve yourself from any responsibility. This is Chris from Deus Ex Machina.